So welcome to our winter Zoom Fest for the Deafblind International Network of the Americas. As a network of DBI, we're focused on bringing together individuals and organizations to share information throughout the regions of the Americas. Membership, as you know, because you're here, is free. Our membership includes people from all over the Americas. And at this point, we have 14 different countries represented and over 270 members. Isn't that amazing? All of us people who started this, and there were like 3 of us or something. I'm going to quit talking so that we can listen to as much Maurice as we can possibly get and turn it over to Julie and let her do a great introduction.
Hello, my name is Julie Meyer, and I am the project coordinator of California Deafblind Services. And I also am on the advisory committee to Deafblind International Network of the Americas. And I am very happy and very honored to introduce my former colleague and boss, and quite frankly, the most important professional mentor in my life, Maurice Belote, to you. And I have to admit, I'm a little nervous because Maurice literally is like the king of introductions of presenters, and I can't believe I'm representing him. If you don't know this about Maurice, he's worked in the field exclusively in the field of deafblindness for 41 years. And most recently, he served as a project coordinator of California Deafblind Services at San Francisco State. He did that from 1992 until his retirement a year ago. And I'm currently sitting at his desk and looking at his desktop computer as I talk about him. While he coordinated CDBS, he served as adjunct faculty.
Julie, we need to talk slower. Everybody has to talk slower for the interpretation. So you cannot talk at the same pace as a regular, everybody has to talk slower.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you, gracias. So personnel prep grants that trained teachers of the deafblind. Maurice, along with the rest of the CDBS staff, started an intervener certificate program as well to train paraeducators to work with children and youth who are deafblind. He is currently adjunct faculty with 2 university teacher training programs. He also serves as co-chair on the National Coalition on Deafblindness, which in the United States is advocating for federal legislation and policies to promote equitable access for individuals who are deafblind. And recently, Maurice found enough additional time in his schedule to begin facilitating an 8-week virtual professional development series using modules developed by the National Center on Deafblindness. Maurice began his career as a home and hospital teacher and later served as a classroom teacher of transition-aged youth at the California School for the Blind. And he's a frequent speaker at national and international meetings. And in 2021, he was awarded the Anne Sullivan Macy Medal for his decades of work on behalf of deafblind students. Maurice is well known and respected in our deafblind network for his knowledge on deafblind education and intervention, as well as his charm, wit, and humility. He continually wonders about topics that are often overlooked or needs for new interventions that we haven't thought of. And then as he writes about those wonderings, as you'll see, and presents about them, as you'll see tonight, and this topic on the need for cognitive closure. The new topics, ideas, and suggestions that he shares with others are helping to support our growth and better understanding the unique needs of deafblindness. So please welcome me, and please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Maurice Belote.
Can I just interject? Sorry, but apparently the Spanish interpreter is not able to interpret due to connections. So do we have anyone who speaks Spanish who needs the interpreter? No, nobody needs a Spanish interpreter for this today? Okay, I guess we just leave that as it is then. Go ahead, Maurice. Sorry to interrupt.
Lo que está diciendo Teresa es que el intérprete en español no está funcionando hoy en la noche. Entonces vamos a tener que manejarnos sin el intérprete. No hay intérprete. Parece que tiene problemas de internet. Teresa está preguntando si alguien necesita intérprete, pero no hay intérprete. Entonces, even Teresa, I'm saying that there's no interpreter. Even if you're asking if we need an interpreter, there's no interpreter. So it's okay. I think people can manage without interpreter tonight. Gracias. Y perdonen la molestia, el problema.
Okay, so am I good to go? Yes, okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and dive in to make sure that we can cover as much information as possible. So you should be seeing my PowerPoint. Some of you have heard me talk about closure before. I've been talking about closure now for at least a couple of years and thinking a lot about it. And this slide is a very basic graphic of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the lack of opportunities to experience closure adds to the ambiguities that deafblind children and young adults already experience. And we know that ambiguity is a major source of stress and anxiety. So this talk today is divided into 3 sections, and they're the 3 sections in the yellow boxes. So I'll talk a little bit about closure, and that will be a bit of a review, and then we'll have questions and answers. I will talk a little bit about ambiguity, and more questions and answers, and then finally a short portion on stress and anxiety. Okay. This is a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Does the lack of closure contribute to ambiguity, or does ambiguity contribute to the need for closure? I would like to say that I don't really care. It probably works in both directions. And so we're going to talk about closure, we're going to talk about ambiguity, and I'll talk about stress and anxiety. So we're going to cover everything, and it all leads to the same place. Now, pay attention to that cute yellow chick in that slide, because the next slide is a puppy and a kitten. And I know that this is late for many of you. It's 4 o'clock on the West Coast of the United States, but for some of you, it's quite a bit later in the evening. So I know you've probably had a long day at work, either teaching, or you've had a long day with your own children. Perhaps you've already had a glass of wine or two. So this is a trick I learned a few years ago, and that is to intersperse my talks with cute pictures of puppies and kittens. I used to do this when I taught late afternoon and evening classes, because we have scientific evidence that looking at pictures of puppies and kittens increases your focus and will keep you better engaged. And I will stoop to any shameless conceit to keep you all with me tonight. Now, lest you think I make this up, I do not. Here is a slide that has the information. It's a research team from Japan. That research was in 2014. So there is scientific proof that looking at cute images improves focus. Okay, so let's start with closure. I am going to ask that you take the way that you think about closure already and set that aside. In our society, we talk about closure sometimes, and typically it's my experience is that it's around two things. One is I often hear about situations where somebody's loved one dies unexpectedly and they never get a chance to say goodbye. So they don't get to have closure with that person. The other way that I hear closure talked about typically is in regards to crime victims. So crime victims often talk about or are asked when the perpetrator is tried and convicted, that's supposed to provide some sort of closure to them, that there's been justice. That's not what I'm talking about today. That is closure. Those are big closure ideas. I'm not really talking about those today. We're going to focus on a couple of other concepts around closure. Now, I do want to point out that this idea has been called a number of things. It's been called cognitive closure or the need for cognitive closure, but I'm going to refer to the need for closure because cognitive closure is something that's a little bit different. And I won't get into how that's different, but you can look it up if you'd like. It's the work of Ari Kraglansky at the University of Maryland. I'm talking about the need for closure. So think about the kinds of experiences that students have in general education programs that represent closure to those students. Examples of closure for general ed students includes finishing assignments or projects, so turning in an assignment, getting graded on assignments or projects or taking tests and getting a grade back on that test, completing a quarter or a semester of study, moving up to a higher grade. So moving in the US, maybe from second grade to third grade. That's when you finish second grade, that's an example of closure. Graduating from middle school or high school. So moving up to a new school. And it also can be with activities children do in school, like if you play in the orchestra, you practice, you finally give your concert, and it's over. The people clap, they leave the auditorium, and it's over. The same thing with a sporting event. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about closure for students in two different ways. The first is, or need for closure or lack of closure is when students or children don't have the opportunity to finish something. So they're working on something and for whatever reason, they don't get the opportunity to finish it. That's one kind of closure. Another kind of closure is doing something that they have mastered over and over and over again beyond the point of mastery. And that's a kind of a different idea of lack of closure, because in general ed programs, for the most part, students are not asked to do assignments or projects or tests over and over and over again once they've mastered it. We have a name for doing something over and over again that you've mastered, and that's called a hobby. But I have, I don't know if you've ever heard this famous quote that nobody knows exactly who said it, but there's a famous quote that says, "No person in the history of the world has ever paid to run a rental car through a car wash." And similarly, as far as I know, there is no deafblind child on the planet who's decided to make a hobby out of putting clothespins on the edges of coffee cans. It's just not something that people do for fun. So I do want to point out that I'm talking about lacking the opportunity to finish something, but also being asked to do something over and over again after you've mastered it. They're both examples of lack of closure. Now, if I can get to the next slide. So there it is. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Imagine a child is in school and this is an image of a child painting with paint on a piece of construction paper. The child is working on an art project, and an artificial stop happens where the child is told, you have to stop working on the project. If the child is not finished, you are very likely to get a response like, wait a minute, I'm not done. I still want to use this other color, or I'm not finished getting the paint all the way to the edges or whatever. And so the child is going to be upset if they're not allowed to finish the project. Another example, you are a mobility instructor and you are teaching a child who's deafblind how to get out to the school playground, and the child loves the slide on the school playground. So you're on your way to the playground, but you run out of time because the child maybe was traveling too slowly. And now it's time to turn back and head back to the classroom. And from the child's perspective, they missed out on the goal of this activity that for them was I was going to be able to go down the slide. And then the last image is a group of students doing a cooking lesson in a class. And imagine you're in this class, you're in this part of this cooking lesson, you've participated in the lesson, and let's say this class is making banana bread. So you've finished the putting together of the bread, you've baked it, but when it's time to eat the banana bread, you're separated out from the group because you're gluten intolerant. And so the teacher says, oh, no, you can't have banana bread. It'll upset your stomach. So you work on this project, and then when everybody sort of experiences completion, you're left out. And so you never get to the end point of that activity. Oh, a puppy to keep you engaged. How cute is that? A little puppy with giant eyes. Okay. So almost everyone craves closure. Almost everybody wants and craves closure. It is a human desire and a human need to reach closure. And you can see this in many, many different ways in our lives. We will watch a movie that we've seen before if it has a really great ending and the ending makes us feel good. Or we'll read a book and we'll feel very satisfied when we come to the end of the book if it has a clear and a clearly defined end to the story. We don't like it when things are left hanging. It is uncomfortable. It creates ambiguity, and we'll talk about that in the next portion. So it creates ambiguity and it's unsettling. So from the music we listen to the television shows and movies we watch, to the books that we read, to the activities that we do, many of the hobbies that we do, they end with a satisfying end that feels very good. Now, I do have to say that every person's need for closure is different. And this is a quote from Dr. Pam Ramsden, who's at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. And she writes, every person's need for closure is different and appears to vary as a function of the situation as well as personality characteristics and values. I want you to pay attention to this next sentence and think about how it's reflected in children who are deafblind. When we are under stress, our need for closure increases. And we know that, this is Maurice talking now, we know that many children and young adults who are deafblind operate under high levels of stress and anxiety. I want to move on to the next sentence. One study found that people who prefer order and predictability, that is, having a more rigid way of thinking and a low tolerance for ambiguity, struggle when they are unable to find the answers to help them move on. And when we talk about people who prefer order and predictability, often that's children who are deafblind. So I'm going to try to come up with a word that describes the kinds of experiences that children have throughout a typical school day that are examples of lack of closure or lack of opportunities to experience closure. And the way I'm thinking about this, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, is the same way that that people think about the concept of microaggressions. And that's a concept that was developed by a researcher named Dr. Chester Pierce in the 1970s. Microaggressions are little slights, not great big things, but little things that happen to people throughout their day, week, month, year, life, that each one isn't that big of a deal, but when combined, it really has a huge impact on the person. So an example of microaggression might be speaking to a hotel maid in the US in Spanish, just assuming that the maid is going to be Spanish speaking. Or a microaggression related to gender might be addressing male colleagues as Mr. or Dr., but addressing female colleagues by their first names. Things like that. Those are considered microaggressions. So I have come up with this idea that draws on the concept of microaggressions, or the concept of it, but applies it to this situation. And I am calling these little things that happen throughout a child's day where they're not allowed or they don't have the opportunity to finish things. I'm calling these microstops. And I've defined that as multiple and often seemingly insignificant instances during which achieving closure is thwarted, and that, when combined, can have a cumulative effect of increasing an individual's stress and anxiety. And I also want to add here that there is often no ill intent. So the person does not mean to do something that's going to cause the child stress and anxiety. They're just little things that happen throughout the day that, when all combined, really have a much bigger impact. So those examples that I gave before are examples of what I would call micro stops, little things that happen throughout the day without ill intent, but they're experiences that happen to children throughout the day that keep them from experiencing the joy and satisfaction of completing their work. Now, those bigger stops, completing a grade or graduating from middle school and moving on to high school, I haven't come up with a term for those yet. Macro stops, maybe super stops, supersized stops. I'm not sure what those are. But what I want to point out is that when we're addressing this problem, macro stops tend to be the solution tends to be systemic. So if a child needs to know that they're graduating from one school and moving to another school, that's something that can happen school-wide. Everybody can participate in that transition and be a part of that closure for the child. Microstops, on the other hand, tend to be a little bit more situational. So not so much addressed in a systemic way, but addressed throughout a child's day. So when we're thinking about how to help children experience closure so that we don't add to their stress and anxiety, we just have to think about all the things we do throughout a child's day that allows the child or the children to experience closure. So that's a little review of things that I've talked about before. You may have heard, but if you haven't heard, hopefully it gives you enough of a taste so that you can understand what we're talking about. So I am going to stop sharing, and we are going to take a little bit of time for questions if there are any. And I'll turn it over to the fine folks at DBI to tell me, are there any questions or comments?
I have a question here from Amanda. She says, hello, I'm a parent and wonder if this recording will be available for us at some point. My daughter has a new aide at school and at home, and I feel this would be of great benefit professionally to those people. It's not information shared by school with staff.
So if you'd like me to answer that, yes, I'm glad to hear that you think this is worth sharing, and yes, it's being recorded. So I don't know how this recording will be shared, but Amanda, I'm also always happy to speak to people anytime. So if you want to talk more about this, you're welcome to email me, and we can set up a time to talk, or just exchange email information. Anything else? Oh, and I see there's a
Maurice, I would add really quick that we don't currently have a platform for our recorded presentations to live on. So unfortunately, we are working on it. Hopefully in the future, we'll have that set up.
But Amanda, I think a similar talk exists in other places that are accessible. So I can, if you email me, I can find that out.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? Please put them in the chat if you do. Okay.
And this is Chris. Can I jump in one more time? I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I would add, if you go to the texasdeafblindproject.org or website, and look at the symposium from 2021. Maurice, your presentation that was on closure is there, and it's interpreted in Spanish and Portuguese as well.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen again and keep going. Okay, so just to draw you back in, there's your kitten. Is that cute or what? I'm not sure, but I think Amanda, the person who asked that last question, I think she had a cat picture as her screen on Zoom. So there you go. Okay. You back up. Okay, ambiguity. This is part 2. So we know that lack of closure contributes to ambiguity, and that ambiguity contributes to the need for closure. We know that. So let's talk a little bit more about ambiguity. And ambiguity is interesting. Ambiguity, the first 4 letters of the English word for ambiguity are ambi. And that's a prefix that means something can go 2 ways. So we get the word ambidextrous from that root, which means that you can either use your right hand or your left hand. We get the word ambivalent from that root, which means that something that you can like something and not like something at the same time. So ambiguity literally means that there are 2 possibilities and it's not clear which one it is. I think in deaf blindness, we should come up with a new word because it's bigger than ambiguity. And I would like to suggest, not that I think I'm going to coin a word, but I think of it almost as polyguity, meaning there are lots of possibilities out there. And so we have to think about, I'm talking about ambiguity, but I'm talking about a universe of possibilities that's more than just a couple. Okay, I have a theory. Let me back up actually, so you don't have a blank slide. I have a theory that for the general public who has access to technology, I have a theory that there is much less ambiguity in our lives than there used to be. And let me give you a couple of examples. So if I want to go to a restaurant, if I want to go to a new restaurant in my neighborhood, I can look on Yelp and I can find out, do most people think it's pretty good or do most people think it's awful? And I can even look at the menu in advance so I can find out, is there something there I'm going to like to eat? If I have an romantic partner and I am curious to know if they are enjoying themselves on a Saturday night or sitting at home alone feeling sorry for themselves and wishing that they hadn't broke up with me, I can look on Facebook and I can see what they're doing on Saturday night. Are they out having a great time or are they home wallowing? If I'm driving somewhere, in the old days, you got in your car and maybe you had the radio person tell you where there were traffic problems. But now we have multiple ways on our phones to find out if there are problems And if there are, how other ways to get around. I took this picture of our bus system in San Francisco. We have our bus shelters now in San Francisco tell you how long it's going to be before the bus arrives. So it completely takes the guessing out of standing there at the bus stop wondering how long you're going to be waiting. And this is the latest thing, and this is straight from the New York Times. And I think this is so interesting. The New York Times newspaper has started putting the average amount of time it will take to read each article underneath the title on their website. So just like on YouTube, if you go to YouTube and you want to watch a video, you can see, is it going to be a short video or a long video? You can see if you want to read about GOP schemes to manipulate elections, that's a 4-minute read. If you want to read about somebody trying to resist and finding herself alone, that's an 11-minute read. So my point is, I think that there are a lot of ways that those of us who have access to technology have had a decrease in the everyday levels of ambiguity that we used to live with. But the students that we serve are not benefiting from this for the most part. So, and I should have pointed out before, when I talked about the opportunities for closure that a typical general education student experiences, the reason why I did that was because we do have some students who are deafblind who are in general ed. It's not a lot. It's about 15% of the population in the US, according to our most recent child count data. And the number of students who take regular state assessments, grade level state assessments, that's only about 3.5% of students in the US that take those. So while there is a population of students who may experience those general ed experiences of closure, I'm focusing on the other 85% of students who spend much less time in general ed and are probably served in a special ed program. So that those are the types of students who may not have access to the technology that reduces the everyday ambiguity that we all experience. And so this is a short section that's out of this interesting book that just came out a couple months ago called Navigating Ambiguity by Small and Schmoot. It's published by Stanford University. And I thought this was such a great quote. Listen to this. Our response to ambiguity, both our interpretations and our emotional response, is not objective. It's deeply connected to experience, context, history, and character. What you see might not be what anyone else sees. What you see today might be different tomorrow. So think about children who are deafblind and the way that they experience an environment or a situation or an activity. The way that we experience it as sighted hearing people is very likely to be very different from the way that the child who's deafblind experiences that same activity. And the way that they experience it one day might be different from the way they experience the next. So I have a list of everyday ambiguities that I think many children and students who are deafblind experience. And I've shared this list before, but I put it up here in case you haven't seen it. Some everyday ambiguities include, who are you? What are you doing? Where am I? Why am I here? What's happening? Where are we going? Where did you go? And when will this be over? Whoops, the slides are moving by themselves. Okay. More everyday ambiguities that are really more focused on communication breakdowns. I don't understand what you're telling me. You're not understanding what I'm trying to tell you. Why don't you understand what I mean? You misunderstood me, and now I want to go back in time so I can clarify. I don't want either of those two choices. I want something else. Slow down. I can't understand you when you go so fast. And then finally, I can't walk and pay attention to you at the same time. So these are just everyday examples of ambiguities that many deafblind children experience. Why is ambiguity such a problem? We humans hate it. Our brains cannot tolerate too much ambiguity. Maria Konnikova, who's a well-known social psychologist, says the human mind is incredibly averse to uncertainty and ambiguity. What's the biggest problem with ambiguity? From my perspective, the biggest problem with ambiguity is that it makes predicting the future difficult to impossible. And we have evolved as a species to be very focused on predicting the future. That's what we do. Every single decision we make is based on us imagining what would happen if we do something, if we say something, if we don't do something, if we don't say something. Everything that we do, we are thinking about what will be the consequence. Well, hopefully everything we do, for those of you who have teenagers, you might be rolling your eyes when I say that, but pretty much everything we do is focused on predicting the consequences of our actions. And so if we don't have access to reliable information, then it makes predicting the future very difficult. And that's what we do, is we predict the future. We might as well have crystal balls on top of our necks, because that's what we're doing all the time, is if I do this, then I hope that this happens, or I hope that this doesn't happen. Let me tell you a quick story. This is a photo of a school that I used to go to a lot. It's called Sierra del Oro School. And I was there to support a young girl who was a student there. And I spent the whole day there, and it was about halfway through the morning. This girl was in a multi-purpose room, and she was sitting in a big ball pit. So if you're familiar with ball pits, it's a big, like a giant rubber or plastic bowl that's filled with all these little plastic colored balls, and you sit in there, and sometimes McDonald's restaurants have them, or Chuck E. Cheese pizza restaurants have them. A lot of schools have them. So she's sitting in the ball pit, and they were trying to get her out of the ball pit to go to lunch. And she loves the ball pit. So they couldn't get her out of the ball pit. So they turned to me and said, not in so many words, but basically this is what they said. They said, okay, Mr. famous deaf-blind expert. How are you going to solve this one? How do we get this girl out of the ball pit? And so I said, well, what's the next thing on her schedule? And they said lunch. And I said, okay, and she likes lunch. So I said, could you give me something that's related to lunch that she'll recognize? So I asked for, I said, how about the plate that she usually eats on? So, so they gave me the plate, and I walked over to her and I introduced myself again with my name cue. And I said, it's time for, or signed, it's time for lunch. And I gave her the plate, and she felt the plate for about 15 or 30 seconds. And then she got up, climbed over the edge of the ball pit, took my arm, and walked with me through the multipurpose room. Well, it was like Moses parting the Red Sea. The people in the program just moved aside as we walked through. And one of them actually said to me, "You are the miracle worker." And as good as it felt to hear that, of course, I had to say, no, I am not a miracle worker. I am just giving her the information that she would otherwise have if she weren't deafblind. And from her perspective, it was too dangerous to get up out of the ball pit without knowing why she was being asked to do that. Because from her perspective, things were great in the ball pit. And so it's kind of like that old TV show, Let's Make a Deal. If I choose curtain number 1, I might get a speedboat. If I choose curtain number 2, I might get a donkey. And from her perspective, she didn't know whether she was going to get the speedboat or the donkey. So she just thought, I'm going to sit right where I am and refuse to move. But as soon as she had clear information, she was happy to make a decision. So it's that ambiguity. I don't understand what's happening, and I don't have reliable information to predict the future, and therefore I'm going to refuse. And this is the last slide of this section, and that is work by Stephen, I don't know how he says his name, Bachner. He's a psychologist at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And this is work that was done decades ago when he identified how intolerance for ambiguity looks in the general population. And I pulled out 4 of his characterizations because I think they're particularly relevant to deafblindness. Intolerance for ambiguity is characterized by the need for categorization, the need for certainty, a preference for familiar over unfamiliar, and a rejection of the unusual or different. And I hope that, or I think it's likely that you will see your child or the students that you serve reflected in these 4 elements. Okay. That's the next break. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and find out from the folks at the Network of the Americas if we have any questions. And I'm seeing Amanda Lynch's cat. Great to see. That'll keep us engaged.
We don't have any questions just yet, but we do have a couple of comments. Just one that Julie has put the link for the Texas Deafblind Project speech or presentation that Maurice did in 2021 for the Texas Deafblind Symposium that Chris spoke of. That's in the chat there for you if you want to access that. And also Hillary has put a link in for another presentation that Maurice did, discussing the need for closure, and discussed the topic with a panel that included 2 adults who are deafblind, along with the original panel from the symposium. And the recording there is available on the Association for the Education and Rehabilitation of the Blind and Visually Impaired, AERBVI. And so she's put the link there. So thank you, Hillary, for that. And just Julie commented that she loves the quote about ambiguity that you made. It resonates for her. In terms of deafblindness, what stands out is the importance of context and past experiences in terms of what a person understands and knows, and the emotional memories they carry.
Great. And Teresa, thank you for pointing out the event that that Hillary coordinated, because we talked about these issues, and we're lucky enough to have a panel of deafblind adults, young adults and adults who sort of address these issues. So that was a great experience. And so that is available.
Yeah, the AER Learn website.
Okay, great. Okay, well then I'm going to keep going. And the final segment, now we're actually back on schedule, believe it or not.
I want to read one of the last comments from Valeria Franco. She's in Argentina. She works for Perkins. And she says, nice story. Communication is very important.
Oh, the story. Yes. So the story at Sierra del Oro School. It's one of the many times I've been called a miracle worker, and one of the many times I had to say, no, this is not miracle work. You can do this too. If you would just take a moment to think about this girl's experience and how she's experiencing the ambiguity of this situation.
Oh, and there's a question from Emilia. I didn't see that before. And then Emilia Hernandez Payans, she's from Mexico. She also works with us. She says, what can you do with students with deafblindness that resist to touch or to hold objects? And that they have been in the school for several years, and that they haven't been able to accomplish that.
Amelia, could I ask that I do the next segment and then I take your question? Because it might make more sense after we talk about stress and anxiety.
So, Emilia, lo que dice Maurice es que él va a responder a la pregunta que vos hiciste después de la tercera y última sección que él va a presentar sobre estrés y ansiedad. Entonces te va a responder después. Emilia dice que está bien. Yeah, Emilia says it's okay. It's fine. Thank you, Laura, for bringing Emilia's question. I didn't see that before. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again here. This work of Stephen Bachner was way back in the, I think it was the mid 1960s. And I'm pretty sure he's still around. Okay, so let's talk about deafblindness, stress and anxiety, and active engagement. We know we have a pretty good idea, at least, that many children and students who are deafblind operate at high levels of stress and anxiety throughout every day of their lives, or many days of their lives, simply as a result of being deafblind and of the way that they perceive the world as fairly chaotic, not very structured or organized, in the way that things come at them in a surprising and unexpected way. And it's why we see kids who are deafblind who are so reliant on predictability and consistency, because that is the way that they, in their own way, take this world that they perceive as total chaos and try to make some order out of all of this chaos. And so we know that students are already stressed and anxious, and some have told us that they operate at levels that we might even call toxic stress levels. So, oh, a kitten and a puppy, because it's 5 after the hour. You've been with me for an hour, so let's keep you connected as long as I can. I do want to point out that this idea of having a problem with ambiguity is nothing new. So here's a photo of Dr. Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud says neurosis, and neurosis is an excessive or irrational level of anxiety or obsession. So neurosis is the inability to tolerate ambiguity. So people have been talking about this for decades. So it's not new, but I do want to offer my own personal thoughts on stress and anxiety. There's a neuroscientist at the University of College London named Dr. Archie de Burger. And his work is just remarkable. And here's it in a total nutshell. He writes, stress peaks when uncertainty peaks. So stress is at its highest when uncertainty is at its highest. And then he continues, and uncertainty is more stressful than predictable negative consequences. And I think this is one of the most important things I'm going to talk about today. That is that ambiguity or uncertainty is more stressful than knowing something bad is going to happen. So I was trying to think earlier today of a good example. So imagine you're a child and you have cataracts, and you're low vision in the classroom with optimal lighting and technology. You use your vision some, but it's very hard to see outside because of glare. So you know that you are going to have PE or physical education on this day. And on this day, when you step out of the school bus to go to school in the morning, it's raining. And you know that when it's raining, you don't have to go outside for PE. You have PE in an indoor gymnasium. But sometimes you go outside if it doesn't rain that much. Now, the negative consequence is you hate outside PE, because let's face it, for a deafblind child, it's not much fun to do anything that involves flying objects, whether they're balls or frisbees or anything else, coming at you in an unpredictable, unreliable way. So, especially because you don't see at all when you're outside because of glare. So you are sitting in school that morning, and you don't know if the PE will be outside or inside, that uncertainty is more stressful than just if you knew that you were going to have outdoor PE that day. So I think this is something that really is worth keeping in mind as we think about how we interact with kids. That uncertainty is even more stressful than knowing something bad is going to happen. And you could think of all sorts of other and perhaps better ways to explain that. Another interesting piece of information that comes from a woman named Dr. Tracy Dennis Tawari, who's a professor at Hunter College. She's done research on anxiety and stress, and one of the things that she focuses on is the fact that we are only anxious about things that we care about. So as much as I might feel bad about somebody, if I'm leaving a meeting and I get on a bus and I'm going home and I see a group of people standing at a bus stop across the street in the pouring rain, I might feel bad for them. I would feel bad for them. I have empathy, but I'm probably not going to feel anxiety and stress about their situation. I don't know what they're waiting to go home to, or whether they're going to work, or what's going to happen as a result of their bus not coming. So I care, I feel for them, but I'm not anxious and stressed for them. We're only anxious about the things that we personally care about. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is just this idea of a negativity bias and how that's reflected in the work that we do with children. So a negativity bias is something that's built into us. It's built into our brains. It is the human tendency to pay more attention to negative stimuli and also to dwell on negative stimuli more than positive stimuli. And there's an evolutionary basis for this. We have a negativity bias, we believe, because when we were evolving as humans, our number one goal every day, back when we were cave people, our number one goal when we got out of our cave every day was just basically to stay alive. And so it was to humans' advantage to pay attention to anything that would keep us from staying alive that day. And good things that happened to us, well, that was nice, but we wanted to make sure that we really focused on the things that were potentially the most harmful. So I took a list from a website called verywellmind.com that lists just a few examples of negativity bias. We remember traumatic experiences better than positive ones. We recall insults better than praise. So you might be at a party and you might spend 2 hours having people say very nice things to you and about you. But if you overhear one person say, "Ooh, can you believe what he's wearing? Can you believe he showed up at the party in those old rags?" Well, it doesn't matter that I've had a lovely time for those first 2 hours. I am going to focus on and pay more attention to that one negative comment. We react more strongly to negative stimuli. We think about negative things more frequently than we think about positive things. We respond more strongly to negative events than to equally positive events. So if you think about the negativity bias, now think about our children or the students we serve. When faced with an ambiguous consequence, we prioritize the negative outcome. And so as an example, this is a photo of a Starbucks coffee shop that's in the lobby of a hospital in Orange County, California. And this is from my experience, this is pretty common now. So many hospitals have things like this in their lobbies. Now, if you are a child who is deafblind, who knows hospitals and has had lots of negative experiences at hospitals, but you are coming to this location simply to get your favorite peppermint mocha latte frappuccino or whatever it is that Starbucks sells. I don't go there. All things being equal, the fact that you were at the hospital is going to have a lot more of your attention and play a more important role than the fact that you're at a Starbucks. So when we are faced with an ambiguous consequence, we think we're going to Starbucks, but we smell a hospital, we see the hospital, we're familiar with the seats in the hospital. When faced with an ambiguous consequence, we, all humans, prioritize the negative outcome. And that's pretty amazing, I think. And it goes back to the negativity bias that's built into our DNA. We have evolved to have a negativity bias. It's built into us. And so based or faced with an ambiguous situation, we're going to focus more on the negative possibilities or the negative outcome. Okay, your last cute kitten picture, and I'm going to wrap this up with something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. A few years ago, this is my most creative way of working the actress Hedy Lamarr into a talk about deafblindness. But a few years ago, I was watching a documentary about Hedy Lamarr called Bombshell. And if you haven't seen it, it is absolutely worth watching. She was a very famous actress in the 40s and 50s, but she was also equally famous as a scientist and an inventor. And the things that she invented paved the way for modern day Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and cell phones, and her technology is still used in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and cell phones today. And the documentary ends with her reading something called the paradoxical commandments. And I have a slide of the paradoxical commandments. So these were written by a guy named Dr. Kent Keith. And I'll just read a couple of them so you can get a sense of what they are if you're not familiar with them. I just think they're just amazing. I think about these a lot. His first paradoxical commandment: people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. So I I have decided that for a talk that I'm going to do in Texas in February, I am going to ask Dr. Kent Keith if I can adapt his paradoxical commandments for deafblindness. Hopefully he gives me permission to do that, but this is what I'm thinking. Here's 3 related to the 3 segments of tonight's program. Related to closure. You might be pressured to stick to a time schedule no matter what. Do your own thing anyway. Related to ambiguity. You may be the only person who uses name cues, touch cues, and object cues. Use them anyway. And related to stress and anxiety, people may only be anxious about things they care about. Model empathy anyway. So hopefully I don't get sued for mildly adapting the paradoxical commandments for tonight, but I'll have those more fleshed out when in Texas for the Deafblind Symposium at the end of February. I'd like to think that you are all now ambassadors of this topic. One thing I learned early in my career is that I didn't want to be the miracle worker. I didn't want to hold the magic key. I want everybody to have the magic key and to have this information so that the information is spread. So if you found this useful, I hope you'll share it with people. You're welcome to contact me if you want more information or need clarification on anything. This has been just a little taste of a few different topics related to closure. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and now think about Amelia's question, which was, if I have this right, what do we do to help students who don't want to touch things? And
hold things also, hold them with their hands, yeah.
Okay, so I can't address everything related to that because that's a huge, it's a question that has the potential for having a huge answer. So
I'm going to say that, I'm going to translate you. So, Emilia, Maurice va a tratar de responder tu pregunta, pero no la puede responder completamente porque la respuesta sería gigantesca.
But related, so there could be neurological issues, there could be lots of reasons why the child doesn't want to touch things.
Puede haber razones neurológicas y pueden haber muchas otras razones por las cuales este niño no quiere tocar cosas.
But related to tonight's information.
Pero relacionado con el tema de hoy, de la noche de hoy.
We want to make sure that we're taking ambiguity out of the situation and making sure that the child has all the information they need so that they know what they're touching, why they're touching, how long they'll touch, what are the consequences if they drop something, etc. Was that too much?
Yeah, it was a lot. So let's go by step. So, lo siento. So, lo importante es quitar la ambigüedad de la ecuación de lo que está pasando. So one question I will answer. What are the questions or what are the things that you have to think about, Maurice? One at a time, I'll translate them.
Okay, so taking ambiguity out of the situation as much as you can.
Yeah, I said that, yeah. And then
so knowing what you're touching.
Saber lo que está tocando.
Why you're touching something.
¿Por qué estás tocando eso?
How long it's going to last, how long the expectation is.
¿Cuál es la expectación o la expectativa de cuánto rato va a tener que tocar eso?
What happens if you decide to stop touching it and it falls on the floor?
¿Qué pasa si lo dejas de tocar y cae en el suelo? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias?
So is it a tennis ball that will bounce, or is it an apple that will turn brown, or is it a treasured glass object that will shatter?
Si es una bola que va a rebotar o es una fruta que si se cae se daña, o si es algo de vidrio que se va a quebrar.
Yeah. So it's giving the child as much information as possible so that they understand the context.
Es darle la mayor información posible al estudiante para que ellos puedan entender el contexto.
Because as we talked about, the child's perspective of what's happening may be very different from yours, even though you're doing exactly the same thing.
Y por lo que hemos dicho, puede ser que lo que el niño entiende lo que está pasando es muy diferente a lo que vos entendés de lo que está pasando.
So you might think, I touch here. I'm gonna grab something. I'm gonna grab this. I have a paperweight on my desk. So
Tiene una cosa que se pone en los papeles para que no se muevan.
I touch it as the adult, and then I give it to the child, and that's my way of saying, it's okay, this won't hurt you, you can touch it too.
Entonces yo tengo este objeto y se lo doy al niño pensando, bueno, está bien, yo te lo estoy dando, es seguro, yo te lo doy a vos.
But I know that if I let go of this, it will either shatter or put a big dent in my wood floor. Actually, what would happen is it would put a big dent on the floor.
Pero yo sé que si lo bota, va a hacer un daño en el suelo, le va a hacer un daño en el suelo.
But you can't really see this, but my fire truck, that's my oldest toy from childhood.
Pero este es un carrito de bomberos que dice que es el juguete más viejo que él tiene de cuando era niño.
That can drop. I can drop that.
Pero se puede caer, no hay problema.
No, I'll never find it again.
Y ahora no lo va a encontrar.
So it's a big question about why children are reluctant to reach out tactually, but that's one piece of it.
Sí, es una gran pregunta porque los niños no tocan algo, pero eso es una parte, una de las posibles razones de por qué eso sucede.
We have another question from Justin. Would there be any benefit to incorporating an object schedule into the routine of a student who has adequate visual acuity but reduced visual field? He reads large print and is also able to access an enlarged print schedule.
So the question is, would it still be helpful to have an object schedule in addition to like a print schedule? That's the question, Teresa?
I believe so, yes. Yes.
I would say it depends on the child. If the child seems stressed and anxious, and you think it could be related to lack of information about the child's schedule, then I would say there's no harm. It's not gonna hurt the child to have an object calendar system, and it might. Object calendar systems aren't just receptive, they're also expressive. So children can use them to request or ask questions about when things are going to happen, or talk about the order of the activities or whatever. So depending on the child's communication abilities, it may make sense in more ways than just like knowing that after I do this, I do that. You know, there's more advantages than just knowing what's coming up, although knowing what's coming up is huge. I mean, I'm obsessed with my calendar. I think about it all the time. I think about what's coming up. It's the last thing I do at night is just I check my calendar once more, just to make sure that I don't have something early in the morning that I'm forgetting. I think about everything that's coming up over the next few days. I just can't imagine living my life every day, waking up and thinking, I have no idea what this day is going to bring.
Mhm.
I would be a mess. And so anything we can do to support schedules and calendars, I think is good. And Lisa, I see you nodding. I guess you're in agreement. I mean, there's so many deafblind experts here that you know, that but I mean, that's what I would say is, yeah, why not try it? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Amy has a question. I'm an intervener to my student. She is classified as deafblind, cerebral palsy, and multiple disabilities. She is sensory and tactily diverse. Do you have a specific way or advice as to how I can best work with her hands without her pulling back?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would suggest sort of, if you're not familiar with the concept of hand underhand versus hand overhand, I mean, chances are if she's an intervener, then that's information that she has. But I would sort of start there, and then like I talked about before, understanding what you're asking the child to do. The child may have a very different perspective of that situation, even though you're right there and it seems like the experience should be fairly even. It's typically not, and we can't get in the heads of the children that we serve. I mean, sometimes we can kind of try, but with some success or no success. But just trying to take all of the surprise and chaos and the unexpected, try to get as much of that out of the way so that the child can feel secure in the information that you've provided, and that you're a trustworthy or trusted person, so the child knows that they can trust you to guide them through this activity in a safe and hopefully pleasurable way. I don't know how else to, I mean, that's a big question. And maybe one that deserves a webinar. I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but it's hard. It's kind of hard to address.
She does say that they do use some hand under hand and coactive signing. I just say never give up.
Pardon me?
I just say never give up, never quit.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, that's for sure.
One comment I just had is I know a young man who is deafblind, and he was nonverbal up until he was 14 years old. And when you spoke of the negativity bias and that we remember the negative things in our lives, he talks about still all the things that were said in negative context by the staff and students at his school as he was growing up, when they thought he could not understand them. And he remembers every conversation that had a negative or just a bad connotation to it. He remembers them all. So keep that in mind. Just because they're nonverbal doesn't mean they don't understand, please, because it really bothered him a lot. And that created a lot of anxiety and angst for him growing up that he could not express. And now that he's 14 and on, he's now 18, he is able to express that and to tell people, look, I hear you and heard you and understood you.
Well, he is a gold mine of potential information that we could all benefit from learning about. But Teresa, you're absolutely right. Part of negativity bias is that it's lifelong. So we are much more likely to remember negative early experiences in our life than positive ones. I mean, not everybody's exactly the same, but we're going to spend a lot more of our time thinking and rethinking some those hurts, those slights, the insults, the unkindness. It's just kind of who we are as humans. I'm not a therapist, so maybe if you spend years in therapy, you can override the negativity bias. I like to think that it's possible, but who knows? It's not my world.
Thank you, Maurice. I don't see any more questions, and I don't see any for you, Gloria or Laura. I think we're good to.
So we're a little bit over time, but I appreciate everybody hanging in there.
Maurice, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your wisdom with everyone tonight. It is so appreciated. It's so good to see you and hear you again. We miss seeing you in person. So, hopefully we can get you to a location near all of us really soon. You're going to have some traveling to do.
Texas. I'll be in Texas. And I'll be in Ottawa for the DBI, the big DBI.
Oh, good. So I hope everybody's going to one of those places. They're both good places to go, depending on the time of year, of course.
I'm requesting Maurice here in Brazil, please.
Yes. Ready.
Yay. Okay.
I have a bag packed all the time, so it's very easy for me to go somewhere.
But thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I realized that I failed to introduce myself. My name's Chris Montgomery. I am the new chair of Deafblind International's Network of the Americas. My God, it's a scary thing to say because I'm filling the shoes of Marianne Riggio, or I'm not, but trying. But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and look for our next upcoming Zoom Fest. We should be shooting something out in the spring. So have a very good closure to your evening, and see you next time. Thank you again, Maurice.
Hey.
Thank you to all of our interpreters and all of our support